And that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The Financial Conduct Authority have concluded their initial report into why the banks have been closing down the accounts of politicians. They've concluded that nobody has been debanked as a result of their political views. I will discuss that complete and total farce in just a minute. We'll also talk about the daily cost of putting up these young men that cross the English Channel has risen to, wait for it, I'll tell you in a few moments. And we interview an intrepid cyclist who's managed to recover £36,000 worth of bicycles without any help from the police at all. But before any of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight, emergency measures are being put in place and commissioners will be appointed to take over the day-to-day running of Birmingham City Council. There'll also be a local inquiry into the authority after it was declared effectively bankrupt. It's now facing a growing equal pay liability of around £1 billion. The Communities Secretary Michael Gove says today's action is aimed at protecting the interests of the city's residents. Now, the Home Office is paying around £8 million a day for asylum seekers to be put up in hotels. That's according to new figures out today. The department's annual report says small boats' arrivals across the English Channel are placing an unsustainable pressure on our asylum system and costing more than £3 billion annually. Labour says the cost of hotel accommodation has gone up by a third since Rishi Sunak promised to end hotel use. The head of Channel 4 Television says there's no evidence to suggest its management were told about serious allegations concerning Russell Brand. It comes as the BBC announced a review of the comedian's time at the corporation. The Metropolitan Police yesterday confirmed it had received a separate report of an assault alleged to have taken place in 2003. 4 other allegations of rape or sexual assault were published as part of a joint investigation by the Sunday Times and Channel 4. Mr. Brand denies all allegations against him. Downing Street says the BMA's members could step back from industrial action this week. That's as rules ensuring a minimum level of cover in hospitals could be extended to doctors and nurses. Consultants in England are striking for 48 hours today over pay. Junior doctors will join them tomorrow and they'll all be picketing until Friday. The government's facing criticism for its decision to give Avanti West Coast a new long-term contract. The Department for Transport has announced the train operator will continue to run services on the West Coast Main Line for at least 3 years. That line runs from London to Glasgow through Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester and Edinburgh. And it's despite the company having the second worst performance records in the country. And as you've been hearing, the Financial Conduct Authority has concluded that there's no evidence that banks close the accounts of customers because of their political views. It follows the closure of Nigel Farage's account by Coutts. The GB News presenter revealed that internal memos at the bank deemed his views inconsistent with its position as an inclusive organisation. The Telegraph says Mr Farage's account wasn't included in the FCA's report. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, it was the Financial Times, that's the very same paper that broke the story that Coutts had closed my account because of insufficient funds. Well, they were wrong about that. But the Times got the leak of the Financial Conduct Authority's report, and they put it today on their front page. FCA report finds no evidence of banks closing accounts for political leanings. Well, frankly, I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. And all of this ahead of the release at midday of this full FCA report, UK payment accounts, access and closures. Now, you would have thought, wouldn't you, that all they had to do was to read that vile 40-page document that Coutts prepared on me to realise my account had been closed because I did not align with the value of the bank. Yet we learned later on that apparently my case wasn't included. But aside from that, they discovered that absolutely nobody had had their accounts closed as a result of their views. Well, I could give you a list as long as your arm of people who've been debanked because of their political views and associations. Let's begin, of course, with the founder and organiser of Leave.eu, Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore. Yes, Banks had his business accounts closed and Wigmore has had both his personal and business accounts closed. What about Richard Tice, now leader of Reform UK? Richard, who was an MEP with the Brexit Party, has found himself rejected for loans because of pure political reasons, and that for his business. Extraordinarily, Kevin Saunders, former boss of Border Force over in Calais, he's had his account closed, he thinks because he appears regularly on GB News. Grant Shapps, Cabinet Minister, had his and other family accounts closed. Toby Young of the Free Speech Union, debanked, taken out of the payment system PayPal. And, of course, the Reverend Richard Fothergill, who objected to the LGBTQ plus propaganda he was getting from his building society only to have his account closed. What we see today from the FCA is a total whitewash. It is a complete and utter farce. But then I guess asking people who are biased to examine whether there is bias is probably not going to get you much of a result. But what's annoying is this. The FCA is the most important regulator in this country. Why? Well, because financial services are not just the biggest employer, not just the biggest earner of invisible income from abroad, it is Britain's biggest industry. And it used to be the jewel in the crown. And many of us believe with Brexit, this was the chance for our financial sector to really get back to where it ought to be as the leading global financial centre. But the fish can rot from the head down. And frankly, my view is that the FCA has now become utterly politicised, filled up with people who frankly have no experience of financial markets whatsoever. Oh, but they're very good indeed at pushing the diversity and inclusion agenda onto our banks, onto our insurance companies and onto the whole industry. Now, the response to all of this from Andrew Griffiths, the City Minister, today simply wasn't good enough. He reiterated that nobody should have their accounts closed for holding a perfectly legal view. Well, yes, but the Treasury, the government, has real power here. And I think we need a complete clean-out of these political appointees that are there within the FCA. Let's start again with people that actually understand financial markets and that come into something and promise absolute political neutrality. I'm asking you, should we sack the regulator? Give me your views. Make sure they're clean, please, to farage@gbnews.com. Well, joining me down the line is David Davis, Conservative Member of Parliament for Houghton Price and Howden in Yorkshire. David, I was talking about the politicisation of the FCA, and we could go on, I guess, and talk about the civil service. Just want to show you a couple of pictures of the people that now run the FCA. Let's start with the CEO, Nigel Farage. And here he is. He is the CEO of the Financial Conduct Authority, and he and the Executive Director, Sheldon Mills, these are the two most prominent people that run the Financial Conduct Authority. Now, I've checked a bit, David, into their backgrounds, but I think you've done a little bit more work on this than I have. Have we politicised the financial market regulator?
Well, I'll start by saying, Nigel, I'm feeling a bit left out. I was the only person in your list that wasn't, in fact. I'm quite jealous now. The simple truth is that either the agency is stupid or incompetent, careless, or doing something to support its friends in the establishment. If you talk about politicisation, being here is basically an exercise of the establishment protecting its own. I mean, Mr. Farage, Nigel Farage, I think, if I remember correctly, was private secretary to Gordon Brown. He then went on to do some other jobs inside the civil service. He then got a job in the London Stock Exchange. He then came back into the system. These jobs rotate amongst people who are the London establishment. And what you're seeing is the outcome of that. What you're seeing is, oh, well, you know, these are our people. We can't be too critical of them. I mean, it is inconceivable that any professional organisation could look at the facts with respect to you, Aaron Banks, all these other people, and say, well, there's nothing wrong here. You know, and they very, very carefully designed their terms. They said, well, we're only going to look from June 21 to 22, which sort of cuts you out. We're only going to look at people who are specifically removed for their political views, as stated by the banks themselves. Well, who's going to do that? It's like asking a burglar.
Exactly. They say to the banks, have you debanked anybody for political reasons? The banks say no, and they say that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's barking mad, frankly. You know, and these are not people off the street. I mean, Mr. Farage's paid over $500,000 a year. You know, his notional salary, I think, is about $455, but you add the package up, it's over $500,000. You know, he ought to be able. You know, frankly, my country solicitor ought to be able to answer this question, and he's not paid $500,000 a year. So, you know, these people ought to be on top of their job. And they're not. And the fact that they have failed in this way, and frankly today are effectively admitting they failed. I mean, they've been saying, oh, well, we didn't do this and we didn't do that and we've got to come back to it. Sorry, too late. If you are the judge, jury, something like this, when you come out with a conclusion, it should stand up. It should not be, oh, well, this is just our view along the way.
So is it time, David, to replace these people with new personnel and to get a regulator that the industry, the country and the world can respect?
Well, yes, it is, because several reasons. I mean, this is the latest of a series of failures by the FCA. I mean, FCA and its predecessor were useless in the 2008 crisis. They got the whole story wrong. In the LIBOR scandal, they basically convicted all the wrong people and yet again let off the bosses. I mean, it was, if you look at that scandal, it was the juniors who got sacked. Nobody who was senior knew about it, let alone went to prison. So all of the behaviour of the FCA, and by the way, they've got some quite expert people working for them, but in the lower ranks, all the behaviour of the FCA is that of an organisation who sees its function as propping up the financial establishment. And that's the opposite reason for what it's there. No. So I'm afraid I think Mr. Farage his prospects, put it mildly, are dim.
David Davis, plain spoken as ever. Thank you. And I could have mentioned that Sheldon Mills, the executive director, of course, for many years worked for Stonewall and leads the diversity and inclusion agenda. Now, I'm now joined by Royston Smith, Member of Parliament for Southampton Itchen. Royston, just briefly remind us of what's happened to you.
March, April last year, I was told that they didn't want to keep, TSB didn't want to keep me in their bank anymore, threw me out, went on for months and months and months, couldn't get any responses from the CEO, Robin Bullock, or even the chairman of the board. Kept my money for months and months and months.
You were frozen, weren't you? I
was frozen, and then finally they now, since I spoke to you last time, they sent me a cheque, and that's all done now. But I put in a request, as you did.
Yep.
And most of
subject access request, which anybody can do.
Yep. And they've sent me. It's not comprehensive. There's things missing in it, which I'm going to go back to them and said, you can find the rest of it that you haven't sent already. But half of that bundle is media, where they have been following me in the media to see what I've been saying. They've got a bundle which is mostly the controversial stuff, as opposed to the things I would say about how wonderful it is someone's A-levels have been good this year. And things like I sold my house. They put down that I'd sold it, how much I'd sold it for, how much the profit was. Now, that went into my personal account with Lloyds, had nothing to do with TSB. So they've been following my personal finances. Yep. They've been following me in the media. They refuse to say why they threw me out of their bank, but why do they have a big bundle on me like that if it wasn't for political reasons?
Well, absolutely, and we've been on to TSB to say you'd be back on the programme, and we got this statement. TSB accounts are reviewed on a periodical basis to ensure that we comply with our regulatory obligations. We do not comment on individual customer cases. There you are.
Well, of course, I can comment on the individual case, because if they were just reviewing my account, my very modest earnings would have all been in the register of members' interests.
Yes.
It's the easiest thing they could possibly follow. But if they've got an oligarch or a drug runner with a £10 million house in London with no way of knowing where that money comes from, how many of those have they thrown out?
Well, quite. Royston, how do you respond when you see the front page of the Financial Times today saying that no one has been debanked for political reasons? Give us your response.
Well, it's just farcical, isn't it? It's as you said. What do they do? Phone the bank up and say, have you kicked anyone out? No, I haven't. Thanks very much. We'll move on. I mean, they're supposed to be looking after us. They're supposed to be the regulator. Now, I know I'm an MP and I'm big enough and ugly enough to look after myself. However, if they do it to me, they'll do it to anyone else. And I'm absolutely sure now, knowing that they had a file on you and they've got a file on me, that they'll have a file on hundreds of people. Okay. Most of the MPs, most of the outspoken commentators, I don't know, people like Matthew Le Tissier, former football player, Lawrence Fox, people like that, I bet they've all got files on them.
Yeah. Now, initially, when I broke the story of what had happened to me and people like you came out, as it were, as well, I got a great response from Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak, and Andrew Griffith in particular, the City Minister.
Yeah.
And it was he that said to the FCA, look into this, investigate this. Now, we're told there is more to come, and these were just the initial findings. But Andrew Griffith and Jeremy Hunt have real power here.
Yeah.
Real power over the FCA.
Yeah.
Today, they haven't chosen to use it.
So far, and I don't think it's the end. I've been speaking to people in government who absolutely understand and acknowledge the situations that we've been put in and how that might affect other people. In fact, some people don't want to ask their banks if they've got a file on them in case they upset the bank. And I don't think it will, but, that's for them.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's over, and I think that Andrew Griffiths has been very helpful. Jeremy Hunt, made a point
they have been
of being, said he was, not debanked, but not allowed to bank.
It's all a bit weak-kneed today.
Perhaps, but I think that, the FCA have not finished yet. I think we'll make sure we keep highlighting it, and I think people like me can highlight it to government, because I have this big bundle from TSB showing how they have somebody sat in a darkened room, some sinister person trawling through media to see whether I've said anything that, they don't like?
Well, you're a Conservative, a Brexiteer. I'm not surprised at all, Royston.
I probably should have expected it.
Deserved everything that was coming to you. Thank you for coming on. Let's finish this segment, and I've been pretty brim and angry all day today. Let's finish it on a slightly lighter note. At about 5 o'clock on the Telegraph website, the latest Matt cartoon has gone up, and I love it. There's a dog with his arms crossed, looking very, very cross and upset, and the owner's speaking to the neighbour and saying, this breed of dog hasn't been banned, but it has been debanked. In a moment, we head to Paris, where, of course, Sir Keir Starmer has been meeting President Macron. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, is there. Let's find out what's been going on there today. Are we going to become an associate member again of the EU under a Labour government? And what do these gentlemen intend to do about the crisis in Lampedusa? All of that in a couple of minutes.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, some of your responses to my questions. Should we sack the regulator? One viewer says, clear them all out. The FCA's farcical judgment over this issue is just further proof that our establishment are packed with Blairite metropolitan Liberals. Couldn't agree with you more. David says, embarrassing beyond belief. This will do untold damage to the city's reputation. The government needs to step in and clear out the pathetic, woke, incompetent members. David, I'm with you as well. And that was the point I was making in my initial monologue. This is probably the most important regulator in the country. It's Britain's biggest business. Now, let's head to Paris and talk to Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, who's been there tracking Sir Keir Starmer's progress with the French President Macron. Chris Hope, what has come out of these talks today in Paris?
Well, they've given each other presents, Nigel. Keir Starmer gave President Macron an Arsenal shirt with Macron on the back and 25, which is the number of times that he's the 25th French president. In return, he got some cufflinks. So it's more about how it looks, really. And they got on well. There's a warm chat. The B word did come up. Brexit did come up, Nigel, not just Britain. But further to that, I asked about did small boats come up, the issue of those unlawful crossings across the Channel? No answer. Now, Keir Starmer came here to France with quite strong words. He said that Labour will improve our relationship with Europe and make Brexit work for Britain. But further detail on that we don't have. But it was interesting, I think, that you did see Mr. Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, talking to the French President Macron. He could be the PM this time next year.
Yeah, but I'm guessing, Chris, that one of the reasons was that, Starmer will say that as Prime Minister, he can talk to these people and he can do a deal on the boats. I mean, isn't that what he's going to come back and say?
Well, he said he wants to do a deal, doesn't he, with more a returns policy. But I'm not sure that the appetite for a full-scale renegotiation of that agreement, Nigel, is what the EU want. They are as bruised by the Brexit drama as we were. What we do know is that the fisheries policy is up for grabs in 2025. The UK is meant to get back control of our waters from the EU. That will be a bargaining chip for the next government, if it's Labour or the Tories, and getting a better deal maybe on selling electric cars with batteries into mainland Europe. So I think that will be in play. And of course, as you and I well know, if you start trading off fish quotas again, that will cause absolute misery for lots of communities in Britain.
Well, we've been selling out the fishing industry for almost 50 years, I'm afraid. They've always been this bargaining chip ever since day one. OK, so really not much detail then of what has actually come out of these negotiations today. But, Christopher Hope, a lot of talk about the possibility of us becoming an associate member.
That talk's emerged from French and German quarters, and of course that's emerged in Brussels, not here, not the talks between Mr. Macron and Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, how it looks, I was talking to a senior cabinet minister, shadow cabinet minister this week, and they said that even if maybe a quarter of Tory voters look at the images coming from Paris onto the news tonight, and they think, well, there's someone who I think could support the UK's messages on the world stage. We might give him a chance. Then it's job done for Labour. I think they're trying to show him at the end of this world tour. Don't forget, he was in Canada with Justin Trudeau. He's in The Hague at Europol. We are seeing an individual here who's trying to impress on GB News viewers and other people who may be sceptical about Mr. Keir Starmer that he give him a chance as PM.
I guess in some ways he is having success with that, isn't he?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think that, he seemed confident. Again, we don't know what was said in the meetings today. I go back to the words that William Hague once said, and rightly so, I think, that the UK needs one government, not two, and one at a time, please. Not in. I think President Macron was aware of that. The meeting was facilitated by the Élysée Palace, but I think they recognise that with the state visit of the King and Queen starting this time tomorrow, where I am in Paris, that they can't afford to muddy waters.
No, I get all of that. Yeah, as you say, he looks confident on the world stage. Goodness knows what he might negotiate with Macron and the EU as Prime Minister. Final thought, Chris, I know you're in Paris, but your ear is always very close to the ground. What a farce, I believe, this FCA judgment is.
Well, I've been looking close at this. It looks to me, Nigel, you may not agree, that they're looking at a very narrow time period, 2022 to 2023. That neatly means that your case is not concluded. I thought the remarks from Andrew Griffiths, the City Minister, who on this issue has been proved that he can reach across the political divide and support what you'd be going through, along with many Tories and Brexiteers. He said today, clearly there is more to be done to validate the submissions by banks and to ensure that the FCA have thoroughly followed up debanked perspectives. I think the key point here is, have they done a prima facie look at it and moved on, or have they deep dived into the issue? Because in your situation, your mortgage is still tied up, it's complicated, but there's no question that your political views were clearly an issue for Coutts Bank.
Yeah, and Royston Smith, I've just had in the studio, and many others. Christopher Hope, thank you. See you back in London tomorrow. In a moment, I'm going to tell you how much it costs every day to put up people, nearly all young men, that cross the English Channel in small dinghies. It's an eye-watering amount. I'll tell you all of that in just a couple of minutes.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Now, if I was to tell you what the daily and the annual costs are for putting up these young men, well, 91% young men, that cross the English Channel in those dinghies, people would say, oh, he's just making it up, isn't he? So rather than me telling you, let's ask Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Director of Migration Watch. Mike, how much is it now costing us on a daily basis to accommodate people in hotels, private apartments, and all the different methods that we use?
It's astonishing. It's 8 million a day.
8 million?
Yes, this has increased from 6 million. It's increased by a third since Rishi Sunak has come into office. The cost of the asylum system per annum is, close to 4 billion now and rising.
4 billion pounds a year.
And this is just the asylum system. That's without considering the costs of mass legal economic migration on housing and infrastructure. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, but it imposes a huge burden on the British taxpayer.
Yeah, do we talk enough about how much this costs? Or do you think generally there's a kind of a reluctance to talk about this? Or will Labour start to use this maybe as a political weapon?
We do talk about the costs, but it does tend to be focused more on the asylum system. I think we should look more at the immigration system as a whole. But obviously this is a very visual phenomenon. Yeah. You have, people in dinghies coming over. Yeah. They're being housed in hotels, subsidised at the expense of the British taxpayer. And, we have a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis. We have young people who can't get onto the property ladder. People paying half their income to live in mouldy shoeboxes. So
we had a young guy called George, I don't know what he was, 19, 20 perhaps, on a live show we did with a live audience last Thursday up in Essex. And he said, look, I'm a young person, I have to scrimp and scrape and fight for everything. Yeah. And of course, housing, a huge cost for young people. He said, I just see an unfairness in people crossing the channel and being put up like this. It is a very live political issue, and Professor Matthew Goodwin keeps polling this and keeps saying Westminster often doesn't want to debate this, but the public does. Is there any end in sight to this from a UK perspective?
I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the Supreme Court decision. The only game...
Which will be when?
Close to Christmas time.
And that is going to tell the government whether they can proceed with deportations to Rwanda?
Essentially, yes. Both political parties are united on what needs to be done. You need to destroy the people traffickers business model. The Labour Party want some sort of exchange programme with the EU, which is very counterproductive. Both the Conservative and Labour Party want to attack the supply chains. But ultimately, you need to make it economically irrational for people to enter this country, and you need to attack the demand side. And as we saw with Australia, and the similar scheme that they had with Papua New Guinea and Nauru, you need to detain, you need to deport people who come here through irregular means.
I don't think either party really have... I mean, even if Rwanda was to be proved legal, we're only talking about a few hundred people, aren't we?
Well, it does depend on a number. You need to deport a critical mass of people for the scheme to actually work, because it needs to be a disincentive. If you're talking about small numbers, then it's not going to work.
It was unclear to me how many Rwanda would take. Was it 200? Was it 2,000? It definitely wasn't 20,000. That I do know. And, we have to look to what the extraordinary, and if ever you use the word invasion, everyone goes mad. But, I mean, what can you call 200 boats? What can you call double the population of the island arriving in Lampedusa over the course of the last weekend? I mean, presumably, if double the numbers thus far have come into Italy that came in for the whole of last year, some of those people finish up in Calais, Dunkirk, etc., don't they?
Yes, and it's not just Lampedusa. There are various gateways into Europe, around Greece, the Spanish islands, even the Balkans. But, ultimately, the EU has tried to kick this into the long grass. They need to scale up Frontex. They need to protect their borders. They need a critical mass of boats there to patrol their waterways.
But that only works if you stop the boats from coming in.
Yes.
Some evidence that the Greeks have done pushback and have said, no, you're not coming in. I didn't see much appetite from Ursula von der Leyen to actually do this. It would seem this is becoming, across Europe, perhaps the most divisive political issue of the lot.
It is. The ironic thing, the EU actually has a bilateral deal with Tunisia, which includes a returns policy, so why aren't they enacting it? But it is very divisive because the EU has to make a decision. Is it a globalist organisation that wants to benefit humanity as a whole, or is it a sort of continentalist supranational group that tries to benefit European citizens? And there are huge divisions there.
Yeah, I saw the former president of Germany saying, hey, we've got to put a number on this, enough's enough. We've got Hungary, Poland saying no more. We've even got the Swedish Democrats in coalition government in Sweden saying no more. It looks as though the South could be completely swamped.
Yes, and it could potentially tear the European Union apart. I can't imagine the Hungarians or the Poles or even the French are very happy about this situation. And, it's an existential crisis for the EU, essentially. And they've got to make their mind up. Do they police their external borders or do they absorb these people? And
Well, I warned them, Mike, I warned them back in 2015 that if you allowed people just to set foot on soil, having crossed the Mediterranean, if they could stay, I said many millions would come. And last night on this programme, I was challenged. I was speaking to an Italian journalist when I said, well, if we go down this route, many millions more will come. And she said, well, Nigel, not millions. Well, I did some homework today on this. Since that speech I gave in the European Parliament, 4.7 million people have claimed asylum somewhere in the European Union. And it'll be 4.7 million more unless something is done. Mike, final thought, heading up to our general election. It's not that far away. Can we see clearly that this will be a big issue?
Yeah, I think the Conservative Party are hoping that the election becomes a referendum on the Rwanda plan. And I think the Labour Party have made a rod for their own back on this, because if it does work, if the deterrent effect does actually take place, Keir Starmer has the option either to stick with his policy or backtrack.
And it was his first big policy announcement, and it seemed within 72 hours he was having to contradict himself as to whether we'd be part of the EU quota scheme for people coming into Lampedusa. Didn't go well for him, did it?
No, it didn't, because the Labour Party promised us a returns policy, you know, a bilateral agreement.
Yeah.
But this isn't a returns policy, it's an exchange programme. It's like the Erasmus scheme, but for illegal economic migrants. And, you know, it's just going to increase the pull factor.
Yeah, how ironic that the Conservatives, having failed so completely thus far on the Channel, could find it to be an election, perhaps not, maybe not winning, but an election advantage issue. Mike Jones, thank you for joining us here in the studio on GB News. Now, the What the Farage moment is English cricket. I mean, it's going so well, isn't it? We've got the World Cup coming up next month. We are the defending holders of that 50-over competition trophy. We would have beaten Australia had it not been for the awful weather up at Old Trafford in Manchester. And generally, cricket, men's cricket, women's cricket is going pretty well in this country. But it's not going well enough for the English and Wales Cricket Board, who have decided they will now spend £5 million that could have been spent elsewhere in youth development or whatever else it may be. No. It'll be spent on diversity training, because they've discovered that we have a structural and institutional racism, sexism and class-based discrimination, and it continues to exist across the game. And every professional cricketer will have to undergo this training. If anybody stands up and says, no, I don't want to do this, they will no doubt lose their contracts with their counties, their clubs, or indeed with England. And so nobody will say a word as the new tyranny is imposed, and as people who are white, middle-class cricketers are told what dreadful human beings they are. It's quite extraordinary. In a moment, a tale about a cyclist, yes, a cyclist, who had 36,000 quid's worth of bikes nicked and managed, through his own investigative work, to recover the whole lot. It did come at a bit of a cost, but he's got his bikes back, and he did it without the help of the police. Are there lessons, perhaps important lessons, we can learn from Damien Groves in just a moment?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Damien Groves is a professional cyclist from Stoke-on-Trent who suffered, well, I'd call it a pretty deep misfortune, but he managed to rectify the situation. And it's just nice occasionally to have an uplifting and positive story on GB News and elsewhere. And Damien joins me in the studio now. Welcome to the programme.
Yeah.
So the story, as I understand it, is you had bicycles in your shed valued at 36 grand.
Yeah.
How the bloomin' hell could a bicycle cost? What, was it 3 bikes?
Four.
Four
Okay. Total. It's just the way it is now. Like as with all sports, it's grown. Bikes more expensive than ever. They range from £500 to £15,000 if you, depending on where you're at. Yeah.
Crikey, Riley. I honestly had no idea they cost this much. So what happens, Damien? You wake up one morning and they're gone?
Wake up to a phone call. We were actually away competing, so I woke up to a phone call to say they'd been stolen. It's the usual thing, police came out, went forward from there. Not a lot happened. Probably 3-4 weeks went by and I just couldn't let it go, so I hired a private investigator myself.
OK.
And to be honest, we didn't get a great deal of success there at first, as good as the guys at Fort Brave are. And then somebody on Instagram messaged me a link saying, I think I've seen your bikes for sale on this Polish website. So I gave this information to the police and my private investigator. And the PI just acted much faster. But also at the same time, the police, I was passed back and forth between Staffordshire and Leicestershire police, because one said they couldn't act without the other and all this sort of tape. And eventually it amounted to, they said that my evidence that the PI had given was...
The private investigator
had given was circumstantial, so they closed the case. Even though it was the PCOs that were dealing with me, even they agreed it was blindingly obvious.
So the police are out, they've done their bit as they see it, but you don't give up?
No. I met with... me and my private investigator then had a chat about what next, if anything. And we just agreed that the last chance saloon was sort of confront this individual via like the channels of contact we'd established and just say, give us the bikes back or we're going to the police, obviously sort of calling his bluff, banking on he didn't know. And it came good, really, but the downside to that was the bikes were already in Poland. So I was given this choice then. I'd either got to wait a week for them to come back from Poland or pay for some professionals to collect them in Poland. So I didn't want to let it fester and maybe let this guy think about how to get out of it. So I agreed to the guys in Poland doing the collection. And then... Had
somebody in Poland purchased the bikes?
See, so we think, there was a bit of conversation with the seller. He obviously wasn't aware. And the advert seemed to come down quickly and he was like, oh no, they sold now. So we felt that time was of the essence as well. So it was very much like, act now, get them back. And then once they'd actually been handed back, it was bizarre, because all of a sudden it's like, yes, I've got my bikes, they're with somebody I trust. And then very quickly it was like, how do we get them home from Poland?
Yeah.
And it just, as bizarre as it sounds, it was quickest, most efficient and cheapest to drive there. So
we've got some pictures of all of this going on, I think we're going to show on the screen. So in the end, they were transported back by van or...?
In the end, me and my friend drove to the middle of Poland, signed some paperwork, did a collection, and drove straight back.
No aggro, no difficulties?
Nothing whatsoever.
Because the people knew they were stolen?
The people that knew they were stolen had handed them to my...
Yeah.
I don't know, you wouldn't call them employees, but the guys that I'd hired.
I wonder how many people who suffer from, a serious burglary actually get their goods back. I bet it, as a percentage, I bet it's not that many. What did all of this cost you?
5,900 and something pounds, pretty much 6,000.
So 6,000 quid to get your bikes back?
Yeah. £6,000.
Were the bikes insured?
2 I thought were insured, but my insurance company weren't going to honour that because they came to me via a sponsor, and in the small print, I didn't realise until this point that anything gifted via a sponsor, insurance companies deem as the sponsor's responsibility to replace.
But I'm guessing, given the level of bike theft and the ease of bike theft, and I don't know the answer to this, I'm guessing bike insurance for very high-end bikes is going to be very expensive.
It's going to go up massively because it's just been a massive business this year. We compete still, and every weekend more and more expensive bikes go missing, and people are left paying for bikes they don't own anymore.
And the insurance premiums go up.
Insurance premiums go up. Sometimes they pay out. I'm guessing sometimes they don't.
Well, your story's ended well, but it still cost you a lot of money.
Yeah.
Perhaps you're incredibly well off, Damien. I don't know.
Not at all. I'm a working class man. It's all on a credit card.
This has come at a bit all on the credit card.
Yeah.
Let's just sort of think a little bit about the role of the police in this. You had good intelligence that the stolen bikes were somewhere in the next county of Leicestershire. Clearly that was very good intelligence.
Yeah.
And the police didn't have the resources, didn't have the time, couldn't be bothered. Where do we sit with this?
I don't think it's that they couldn't be bothered. I think that the person who was asked to issue a warrant at Leicester Police probably opened an email, saw stolen mountain bikes, matching fence panels, and just said, we haven't got time for this, and closed it. Didn't look at the finer details, didn't give it the time it deserved, and just shut the case on me. Both the PCOs in Staffs and Leicester both agreed this was solid evidence that warranted an emergency warrant.
How does that leave you feeling about the police, Damien?
Frustrated, to say the least. I really wasn't happy when I phoned my PCO back and said, you're leaving me no choice other than... I feel like going home and... To be blunt, I actually said to him, I feel like going home and putting my head in the oven over it, but you're leaving me no choice. I can't. I'm going to have to do something myself, which was never going to be anything like, other than what I did, really.
But you went to Poland.
Yeah.
You didn't know what you were going to confront. You might have walked into a violent or dangerous situation.
I was confident that I wasn't, but yeah, there's potential for that. But like I say, the company that I worked with, Fort Brave, I put my utmost trust in them, and they were adamant that I was going into a safe situation to get it back.
Now that you've done all of this, gone to this effort and used your nous, and well done you for doing it, have you written back to the police to say, look, if I was able to recover these bikes, why couldn't you?
I've had a lengthy conversation with...
Have you?
I forget his rank now, but with a higher officer at Staffs Police. And he basically just said it's red tape. The system doesn't allow the officer on the ground to just be like, yep, that's solid, go and do this. They have to then present a case and jump through all these hoops before they've got permission to act.
I mean, I try on this programme, Damien, to be as pro-police as I can, because I think they've got a rotten blooming job. And I don't agree with everything they do. I just wonder in this case, it could well be that they have so many thefts to deal with. So many home thefts to deal with, bike thefts to deal with, let alone, what's happening with drugs gangs in Stoke-on-Trent or violence, or maybe they're just overwhelmed.
I think they're overworked and underpaid, to be blunt.
Do you really?
Yeah, 100%, yeah. My partner, she was a police officer.
There's frustration, but there's no bitterness.
My bitterness and frustration is with the system that they have to adhere to. But that doesn't change the fact that they are Like I say, my partner was a police officer until about 18 months ago. I can vouch for how overworked and underpaid she was firsthand. And she didn't stick it. So.
I have to say, in many ways, Damien Groves, it's an inspiring story. Would you recommend to other people who've suffered serious theft hiring a private investigator?
Yeah, 100%. If you... Yeah, I'd do it all again.
Well, you've done it once successfully. I hope you never have to do it again.
Yeah, me too.
But thank you for coming on and sharing the story. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Well, there we are. There is some good news out there. He managed to get 36 grand's worth of bikes back, and well done him. It cost him a couple of bob. Now, I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, I woke up this morning to see the front page of the Financial Times and thought you must be having a laugh. We had Royston Smith on the programme.
Right, yes.
Earlier on, Conservative Member of Parliament.
I know. Very good man.
Southampton. I mean, when he got his subject access request back from the TSB, I mean, they'd virtually been tracking him as if he was a foreign spy. What the FCA said today, doesn't that damage the reputation of our financial regulator in the eyes of the world?
The FCA leaked its opinion in favour of the chief executive of Coutts before she went.
Yes.
The FCA has been behind a lot of this woke agenda, been enforcing it on people. They are wokeness personified, and then they come up with a nonsense report that conveniently says you were out of scope. So the most important, most high-profile case of debanking for political reasons of a bank trying to shut down freedom of speech, the useless, incompetent, failing FCA doesn't have in scope. And it is currently the organisation with the power to make banks behave properly if they do debank people for political reasons. And I just don't think that's good enough. We need legislation that actually ensures that this is above some failed regulation.
And it matters on the world stage as well. The financial markets, the City of London was once the jewel in the crown. Should we sack these politicized administrators of the FCA? Of course
we should. The FCA just looks a laughing stock. I'm afraid Andrew Bailey didn't run it very well. When he was in charge, it didn't work. And what happened? He got promoted. So if you're an incompetent running the FCA, you'll probably think you're next in line to come down.
And your salary goes through the roof and all the rest of it. Well, I'm smiling, but I've been pretty fuming about
understandably. It's absolutely outrageous. And it's so stupid that it will make people realise that the report is worthless.
It's crackers. Let's see what the weather is. Maybe that'll cheer us up a little bit.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm Alex Burkill and welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. We do have some further wet and perhaps thundery weather on the way with some strong winds too. The isobars are very tightly packed at the moment, which just illustrates that it is so blustery, so windy at the moment, and low pressure arriving, bringing some further wet weather to many parts as well. As we go through the end of today and overnight, we are going to have some heavy bursts of rain, particularly across parts of Scotland. There is a warning in force here, and also some further heavy rain for parts of Western England and Wales, also a warning in force here. Temperatures for many, well, it is going to be a mild start on Wednesday morning, though it may not feel it because of the unsettled weather. A band of rain then is going to push its way eastwards across parts of England and Wales in particular, with some heavy bursts as we go through the day, reaching parts of the southeast into the afternoon. Some brighter skies across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but also a feed of showers coming in, and some of these could be heavy and thundery. Temperatures should just about get to highs of around 20 Celsius in the southeast, but in the wind and the rain, it's not going to feel as warm as that. That rain will eventually clear through as we go through Wednesday night into Thursday, so a brighter start for many places on Thursday. But again, we are going to see plenty of showers and also some heavy showery rain feeding into western parts of Scotland in particular, with the risk of some thunder. There will be some further unsettled weather through the end of the week, but perhaps something a bit drier to start Saturday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.